You can swap speakers by clicking on the speaker selection button. More than 400 voices in 100 languages are available for any type of content, like corporate training videos that I am perfect for. He mentioned the abandoned park on the outskirts of the city, known for its scary stories and urban legends. The park had been closed for decades after a mysterious fire that destroyed part of the attractions. Since then, it was considered cursed. Have you guys heard about the abandoned park? Tom asked, his gaze flickering with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Lisa and Julia exchanged looks and laughed nervously. Of course everyone has heard stories about that place, Julia replied. But you're not suggesting we go there tonight, are you? Tom nodded with a mischievous smile. Exactly. We're going to explore the park at night, when stories say strange things happen. It's going to be quite an adventure. Lisa looked out the window, watching the rain fall. The idea of exploring an abandoned park at night, with the wind howling and the rain falling, made her apprehensive. She was not a fan of horror films, and, at that moment, the atmosphere of the film they were watching was already giving her goosebumps. I don't know, Tom, Lisa said, hesitantly. It's a crazy idea. What if something happens? What if we find something scary there? Tom laughed, trying to dispel Lisa's fears. That's why it's an adventure, Lisa. We'll find out if the stories are true or just urban legends. And if we find something scary, well, that'll make the night even more exciting. Julia supported Tom's idea, adding that they would be together and that there was no reason to be afraid. Lisa hesitated for a moment longer, but curiosity and pressure from her friends finally convinced her to accept the challenge. Okay, Lisa said with a resigned sigh. Let's go to the abandoned park, but promise that we won't get separated and that we won't stay there for long. Tom and Julia agreed, and the group began preparing for the adventure. They dressed in warm, waterproof clothing to face the rain and brought flashlights, cameras, and fully charged cell phones to document the experience. With hearts full of excitement and a touch of fear, they left the house and headed to the abandoned park. They had no idea what awaited them on that dark night, but they were about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever. The abandoned park rose before them, a place that was once a haven of joy and fun, now reduced to a dark and decaying landscape. The rusty gate creaked as they pushed it inside, as if protesting their intrusion. The rain fell more intensely, soaking his clothes and making the atmosphere even more melancholic. Lisa felt a sense of oppression as they walked along the paths covered in damp leaves. Twisted trees seemed to clutch the sky, and abandoned attractions seemed silent witnesses to a forgotten past. The group approached a rusting carousel, whose colorful lights still hung despite years of neglect. The empty chairs swayed gently in the wind, as if inviting someone for a stroll. But there was no one in sight. As Lisa, Tom, and Julia watched the carousel, the lights began to flicker, giving off a faint, disturbing glow. The sound of a children's melody echoed through the air, but there was no electricity to power the ancient attraction. A chilling sensation ran down Lisa's spine. Tom and Julia exchanged uneasy glances. That's weird, whispered Tom. How could this be happening? There's no electricity here. Lisa looked at the carousel, her heart beating fast. The children's music continued to play, filling the air with a sense of macabre nostalgia. Let's get out of here, she said in a shaky voice. I don't like it. As they walked away from the carousel, the colored lights returned to their off state, and the melody disappeared. But the feeling that they were being watched persisted, as if the park itself was alive and watching them. They continued to explore, arriving at an abandoned building that appeared to be an old pavilion of mirrors. The structure was covered in ivy and mysteriously intact, considering the state of decay of the rest of the park. Julia looked at the pavilion of mirrors curiously. How about we take a look inside? There must be some amazing antique mirrors in there. Tom nodded, supporting the idea. It could be interesting. And if we encounter something scary, we can always have fun with the distorted reflections. They entered the pavilion, and immediately, the ancient mirrors reflected their distorted images. The walls were covered in broken mirrors, and the floor was covered in dust and debris. Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine when she saw her own image reflected in the mirrors. His eyes seemed empty and lifeless, as if they belonged to someone else. Julia and Tom also watched their reflections. and the atmosphere in the pavilion became dark and tense. Julia approached one of the mirrors, examining her reflection curiously. But suddenly, she gave a shrill scream and jumped back. Her friends rushed to help her, alarmed. "What happened, Julia?" Tom asked, worried. Julia was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw something in the mirror. It wasn't my reflection. It was something else. It was scary, like a shadow." Tom looked at the mirror Julia was looking in, but his own reflection was there, looking normal. He approached the mirror and looked closely, but he didn't see anything strange. Lisa tried to calm Julia. "Maybe it was just your imagination, Julia. This place is scary, and our minds can play games with us." Julia agreed, but her expression remained apprehensive. "Yes, you must be right. Let's keep exploring, but stay close to me, please." With hearts still racing, the friends left the Pavilion of Mirrors and continued to explore the abandoned park. They had no idea that the worst was yet to come, and that their imaginations and fears would come true on that dark night. As Lisa, Tom, and Julia continued exploring the abandoned park, the feeling that they were being watched persisted. The dark night and constant rain created an atmosphere of gloom, making the place even more frightening. They approached an ancient, rusting roller coaster, its twisted structures looking monstrous against the night sky. As they watched the abandoned attraction, they heard a distant sound, a soft, unsettling murmur that seemed to come from somewhere in the shadows of the park. Lisa turned quickly, her flashlight illuminating the gnarled trees in the distance. "You heard that, right?" she whispered. Tom and Julia nodded, their gazes tense as they tried to locate the source of the sound. The whispers continued, growing in intensity, as if they were getting closer. "It must just be the wind or some animal," Tom suggested, although his voice shook a little. "Let's continue." However, as they progressed, the whispers persisted and became increasingly disturbing. They felt like they were trapped in an invisible web, with something sinister stalking them in the shadows. Suddenly, Julia tripped over a fallen branch and fell to the sodden ground. Lisa and Tom hurried to help her, but when they turned to continue, they realized that they were surrounded by shadowy, indistinct figures. The shadows moved silently, their outlines blurred as if they were made of smoke. The hands stretched out towards them were pale and translucent. The friends panicked, their screams echoing through the darkness as they tried to escape the shadowy figures. Tom grabbed Lisa's hand and pulled Julia with him as they ran through the abandoned park. The shadows seemed to chase them, moving with terrifying determination. The ominous whispers intensified, becoming almost deafening. They had no idea where they were going. They just wanted to escape this nightmare. The rain soaked their clothes, and the mud made escape even more difficult. The friends were panting and desperate, but they couldn't stop. Finally, they reached an area of the park where the dense vegetation was thickest. Lisa, Tom, and Julia slipped into the trees, hoping the shadows couldn't follow them. They huddled in a bush, trying to catch their breath and understand what had happened. The whispers gradually faded away, but the feeling that they were being watched persisted. Julia looked at her friends with wide-eyed terror. What were those things? What's going on here? Tom was speechless, unable to explain what they had witnessed. Lisa tried to calm her friends, although she was equally perplexed and terrified. "I don't know, but we have to get out of here. Let's go home and try to figure this out later." Agreeing with the idea, they left the bush and started moving towards the park's exit. The rain continued to fall, and the abandoned park was once again enveloped in silence. There was no sign of the shadows or the disturbing whispers. However, the experience left them deeply shaken. They did not know what they had witnessed or who the shadowy figures were that had pursued them. The night that had begun as a curious adventure had turned into a dark nightmare, and they longed to get home and try to understand what had happened. But the abandoned park would never be the same in their memories, and the fear they had experienced would continue to haunt them in the dark nights to come. Lisa, Tom, and Julia finally emerged from the abandoned park, their hearts still racing from the terror they'd experienced. The night was darker than ever, and the rain continued to fall relentlessly. They walked in silence through the empty streets of the city, their footsteps echoing like an echo of their inner turmoil. When they got home, they decided never to talk about what they had witnessed in the park again. It seemed surreal, and everyone had the feeling that no one would believe them, even if they told the story. They preferred to leave the past behind and try to forget. However, the night in the abandoned park would not leave them so easily. Lisa began to have terrible nightmares in which she was chased by indistinct, whispering shadows. Her nights turned into torment, and she was constantly exhausted during the day. Tom and Julia also faced their own manifestations of the terror they had experienced. Tom began to hear distant whispers when he was alone, and Julia swore she saw shadows moving in the corners of his eyes. One day, while her friends were gathered at home, trying to understand what was happening, Lisa found an article in the local newspaper. It was an article about the abandoned park, reporting that it had been sold to an investor who planned to revitalize it and turn it into a tourist attraction. Lisa, Tom, and Julia were shocked to see photos of the park in the present day. The attractions had been restored, and the place was full of happy visitors. It seemed like a lovely, welcoming place, very different from the scary place they had experienced. Intrigued and hoping to solve the mystery, the friends decided to pay a visit to the renovated park. Perhaps they would find answers to their terrifying experiences that dark night. As they approached the park, the atmosphere was completely different from the first time. The sun was shining, and children's laughter filled the air. Lisa, Tom, and Julia walked along the trails they had walked before, visiting the rusty carousel and the pavilion of mirrors. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The rides operated normally, and there were no sinister whispers or menacing shadows in sight. Friends began to wonder if their previous experiences had just been a figment of their imagination and fears. However, when they reached the pavilion of mirrors, something made them stop. The abandoned building was there, covered in ivy, just as they remembered. Tom looked at Julia and Lisa, and their eyes met with mutual understanding. They decided to go inside again, hoping to find some clue that would explain what had happened that dark night. Inside the pavilion, the old mirrors still reflected their distorted images. Lisa looked at the mirror in which she had seen her distraught reflection last time. But this time, everything was normal. Julia and Tom also examined the mirrors, but found nothing out of the ordinary. It seemed like the pavilion was silent, with no disturbing whispers or threatening shadows. As Lisa approached one of the mirrors, she saw something that made her shudder. Her reflection was there, but beside it was a shadowy, indistinct figure staring straight at her with empty, icy eyes. She backed away with a scream and pointed at the mirror, but her friends saw nothing. Tom and Julia looked at her with concern, not understanding what was happening. Lisa was terrified, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what she saw. There was something there, a shadowy figure next to me in the mirror. I swear I saw it. Tom and Julia exchanged nervous glances, unable to see what Lisa saw. They began to wonder if Lisa was going crazy, if all the terrifying experiences that night had affected her mind. They decided to leave the pavilion and return home, but Lisa was still upset and scared. She knew what she had seen, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that the abandoned park held dark secrets that should never be revealed. The night in that abandoned park had left an indelible mark on their lives, a curse that persisted even in daylight. No matter how hard they tried to deny it or forget,